You guys all coming along? I'll kick into it. So to start off with, who am I? For anyone who doesn't know who I am, I'm Luke Davis. I've worked at Yeehaa Fishing for the last 15 years. I've been targeting the southern bluefin down at Waiho Bay since basically the beginning, since in 2017. They ran through there, which basically the last couple of chats I've done, I've kind of gone through how that all kicked off and started. So I'm going to skip a bit of that this year, but I've been doing it since then. Basically since the beginning of the fishery, I've been going down there trying to catch them. Sometimes successfully, sometimes not. But a bonus for you guys is I do heaps. I've been instructed for a microphone. Luckily for you guys, I do heaps of fishing. Don't have much of a life in any other way. So everything I've kind of discovered over the last, I'll say it like 7-8 years, I'll basically bring to you guys and try and share what I've learned to help you guys if you're going to make a trip down there and make the big effort. It is a big tow, you know, from Auckland for me, it's about 7 hours to tow there, so it's a big effort. So I'll try and help you guys with what I've learned. And hopefully it's, but you know, hopefully there's some instructional for you guys. Most of this chat will be based around Waiho Bay, and I'm basically going to try and split it up with a bit of trolling, and then about 50% of it will be about the nighttime jigging, which is obviously quite new. Last year was the first year it happened, so I'll cover a bit of that as well. All right. So to start it off, a lot of you guys have to plan around work. I'm in a job in a situation where I don't have to as much as you guys do. We're pretty free at Yeehaa with swapping time around, so we go when the weather allows. But for you guys and planning, I get asked a lot about when to go and a whole bunch of features. So I'm just going to run through that. So last year was a bit of an anomaly where it kicked off about the 15th of May. Guys started catching them down there. This year seems to be a little bit more of a normal year. And it kind of starts around that like first to second week of June. So like pretty much any time from like the 8th to the 12th of June is a standard time for them to start getting caught off Waiho Bay. It'll run all the way through until the end of August. Again, last year it seemed to kick off pretty early, and it also seemed to finish a lot earlier than normal. Last year it finished around like the middle of August, where I've had some of my best fishing right until the end of August, and then some of my customers catching them all the way into September. It is weather permitted, so some years the weather just blows out and then no one's able to get out, but give or take, basically from the middle of June all the way through to the middle of August, is you're pretty much guaranteed to see some fish down there. Okay, moon phase. Basically, I've covered everything else there, and then going on to moon phase. A lot of guys have a lot of moon phase chat. I shared this photo last year to you guys, and you guys really appreciated my lovely drawing, which is this one here. Originally, when this fishery started, a lot of the fishing was based around the commercial information that was given to us. The commercial fleet liked to fish around the full moon. The full moon, for them, obviously the fish are spending a lot more time maybe on the surface or closer to their gear at night. In the first couple of years, a bunch of us raced down there around the full moon and then struggled over that period. Then learning that we're fishing during the daytime, most of it, and fishing during the daytime, the fish during the full moon are sitting a lot deeper, or we're not getting as many bites as they are. So this little diagram here is just to show you that if you are trying to plan a trip and you're going to book a weekend, we've caught them around the whole moon cycle. I haven't found a time that's any better than any other part of the cycle. So obviously after the full moon, I've caught them through the third quarter to the new moon. We've caught them in all the way back around. And so just pick either the weather or the time that you can go down there, is all I can say. All right. Little diagram there of where. So obviously the main place I've always targeted them is out of Waiho Bay, down off East Cape. In recent years, it was always kind of described about like a run of tunas where they come through and then steadily move throughout the Bay of Plenty. In the last previous seasons, it seems to be once they turn up off Waiho Bay, they seem to be all through the Bay of Plenty. And as soon as guys are catching them there, they're also catching them up off the Aldi Knoll and the Aldi Rise. So your main places, obviously Yeehaa Bay is nice and close to shore, so it's a lot easier, it's a lot shorter run, which allows you to fish in a lot rougher weather. And I'll get into weather a little bit too, but because of the proximity to the 1,000 metre mark and also the shape of the country, it gives you a lot more prediction from our standard southwest west wind. Coming up the coast, obviously Tauranga, Whangamata, Whakatane, all's good, but again, you've got a big run offshore, which is good if you've got a good boat and nice weather. Simon touched on the weather, like obviously picking and planning weather. Unfortunately for us, trolling during the daytime, the fish seem to feed a lot better when it is rough. We've had substantially better fishing when it's that 10 to 15 knots whitecappy. That whitecappy conditions, they seem to eat a lot better. Unfortunately, when it's 5 knots and glass calm and you want to be out there, the fishing during the day is usually awful. There is exceptions to every rule, but obviously if you are having to travel out of those other destinations to get better fishing, you're not going to want to travel 45 nautical miles in what could be 20 knots, which could be a pretty hard ride. All right, so the next slide here, this one here is quite a big one, and this is something that's changed significantly in the last 12 months. Ever since the nighttime jigging happened, I don't know if I spoke to you guys about it last year, but I'd started fishing over deep bait about 2 years ago. And when I talk about deep bait, I was actually heading out one trip a couple of years ago when I got a new sounder, and I cruised out and I went through like the Sea Valley and I was sounding down to like 600 looking for swordfish bait or something like that as I was cruising out to the grounds. Left my sounder on low frequency looking down to 600, left my high frequency on, like half an hour later ran out, caught some bluefin. And on the sounder I was marking like big balls of bait down like 400, 450. And when I marked these schools of bait, I was wondering, I've always wondered why the fish were off Yeehaa Bay. I fished there for so many years, done so many days fishing. For anyone who was at the last year's talks, like I'll troll around for days and have like a clear screen. Like we mark no bait, we mark nothing, we see nothing. And I was always wondering why they were there. And then a couple of years ago, I started marking this deep feed, and then I started catching fish on top of this deep feed. And I was thinking, oh yeah, I'll crack a little code here, I'll start fishing where I mark this deep feed. Had no idea what the deep feed was. And then last year, the night fishing kicked off and basically just answered the question for me. All the deep feed that I'd been marking for the last couple of years that I've been fishing over the top of were these little fish called a lanternfish. Oh, this is what I'm guessing. Also, by the way, I'm just putting this 2 and 2 together here, so I might be wrong.
How big is that fish?
So a lanternfish they're about 2 inches long. The photo on the right there is one sitting on the gill plate of a southern bluefin. The ones on the bait board there have just come out of a fish we've caught at night. And so they're quite a small little bait fish. They're only about this big. And the photos on the left and the middle photo is something that happened 2 years ago as well, because at this time I didn't know what they were. And we're fishing one day down there. I was fishing next to Ethan on pelagic, and we were messaging, and it was one of the best days fishing I've had down there, and we caught a whole bunch of fish on top, like while we're out there, and I was marking a few fish. You'll see on my sounder there I was marking a few fish around 60 metres. And so I was marking them and getting bites out of them. Ethan was marking them and getting bites out of them, and I text Ethan, I was like, what the hell's going on here? Like, this is the best fishing I've seen. We're not marking, like, why are they here? For me, sea surface temperature and chloroform and stuff like that hasn't had a huge effect on my fishing for the southerns. And I was like, why are they here? And he actually sent me a picture. He goes, check out Archie's Snapchat. So that's Archie, who runs East Coast Charters. And that was a Snapchat from Archie. And you'll notice on my screen, I'm looking down to the top 100 metres. Obviously, because we're trolling for fish during the day on the surface, I was just looking for the top 100. In my mind, I was thinking nothing that's below that will come to the surface to eat my lures. But the big thing that I was missing at this point was that all the feed they were feeding on was sitting down sub 100 metres. And you'll see he's marking the fish above the feed layer, but I'm just missing out on the feed altogether. The fish that day were throwing up handfuls of these little tiny fish, which at the time I thought were like a white bait or like, I don't know, some small little fish. I didn't really think too much of it. I thought it was like a feed layer, like a, like when you're sword fishing, you get like a scatter layer or something like that. I thought it was more so that they were feeding on a scatter layer more than actually like a fish. they were throwing up tons of these little fish, and I was thinking, oh yeah, that's cool. And on that day there, the schools of lanterns hadn't gone very deep. So something I've worked out now is that probably why we get better bite times first thing in the morning and last thing in the evening is these lanterns move up and down due to the light source. So during the day, they go down between, this day they only went down to 150, other days they might drop down to 600. And you probably find these tunas are following this feed layer down to 600 and then makes our fishing for them incredibly tough during the day. We might be picking up traveling fish on the surface, or like, you know, they might have to come up the surface to regulate their body temperature or something. But unfortunately, when the day's really nice and we're marking that feed down real deep, 400-600, I'm guessing most of the fish that we're fishing for are following that feed layer down. And then on a day when the feed layer stayed up nice and high, maybe due to conditions like it's overcast, there's not as much light, you know, it's a rougher day, the feed is staying higher and the fish are staying higher with it. Okay, so it's a little bit that that I'm piecing together with this whole jigging situation that started. All right. This photo here is, as I'm heading out, that's basically what they're coming up on my sounder like during the day. Unfortunately, this is the only photo I have of them during the day. And this is in the afternoon, and in the afternoon, that school of bait there, like in the area as we're fishing, those schools of bait are just slowly rising to the surface, and then by the time it gets to about 5:40, so in like 30 minutes from that photo, all of that stuff will be basically in the top 100 meters. Okay. So just quickly on that, so that's, the lantern fish has been a pretty big discovery for why the fish are off Waihau Bay. To me, it kind of feels like it explains a lot why they're there, and also explains some of the days why we have better and worse fishing. And then when I'm fishing now, I'll run my sounder like it is there, looking at the top 120 on the surface, and then I'll also be running a low looking for the deep bait as well. And then once finding that, fishing in those areas. Okay. I am going to run through a bit more of this trolling stuff a bit quicker than previous years. Yes, sir? Just quickly.
That red mark.
Yep.
You think that's bait? Or that's
Yeah, so that's that'll be a school of lanternfish.
So the other marks around is just scourge?
That'll be like interference. Yeah, it'll be nothing. Okay, so I'm going to run through this a little bit quicker because basically I'm going to get a bit more onto the jigging and the nighttime fishing, which we're a bit more excited about than the trolling, and I have covered that for the last couple of years. So running through, if you are setting up your boat to go down there trolling during the day, speed that we're looking at running, 5.5 to 6.5 knots, generally going a little bit slower than we will be marlin fishing. One, a positive that we're saving gas. Two, it seems to be maybe that the fish are coming from quite deep. They do seem to hit the lures a lot cleaner when we're going that slower speed, but we do get bit pretty good running a little bit slower than faster. In previous years gone by, I think I've told a story where I was fishing next to Aaron Sargent on Strictly Fishing back in the day. We're fishing side by side with him, and he was getting bit every pass. Later in that night in the pub, he came into us and he came up to me and goes, "How fast are you trolling?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" He goes, "How fast are you going?" I said, "Oh, just our marlin speed." He said to me, he goes, "Slow down, like try going a little bit slower." The next morning we put the gear out, within 10 minutes we caught one, and then from that day forward I've always just gone slower. Bring your revs back a little bit then when you are trolling. Depending on your boat, it also helps. Smaller boats obviously will troll better at that slower speed, so and then your bigger boats, obviously some launches, if you are taking a launch down there or something like that, they will struggle to go that slower speed, but that 7.5 knots is still fine. Now, another difference from marlin fishing is we'll set our lures further back. Done this lovely drawing for you. The lines in blue will be our normal spread. So that will be our surface trolling lures, so our normal, our skirts, which we're going to. Normally marlin fishing will start around that second or third wave, where for the bluefin fishing we'll generally start back at the fourth. We'll then basically stagger our spread a wave back as we go back the lures, and then ending up basically back at the eighth wave. The yellow lines that I've included on there would be if you're wanting to add in something like a deep diver, either like a bibless or a bib lure. Now, I hadn't towed a lot of bib lures or bibless lures in the seasons gone by, And it was really funny, I didn't really notice it until today. My boss has actually made a mention. He's like, why do you not tow those lures? And then I was looking through some photos because the season just been off the Bay of Islands, we had incredibly good yellowfin fishing. So our yellowfin fishing was exceptional. And one of our best lures was that one there, the Ozeri Bonita, like a bibless. And I was like, I don't know, man, like we've never really towed them. And then I was looking at photos, and when we were yellowfin fishing, the water was like glass calm, and it was like 10 knots of wind, and there was no swell. And then I went back and I was looking at bluefin photos today, and it's like 15 knots. There'll be like a 2-meter swell running, and it's a lot harder to control your boat speed, and also just even sometimes fishing. Like some of the days I've been out there, when it's been a bit rougher, I've basically dropped down to 3 lures, just so that I can continue to fish without tangles. It's not easy when it is rough, especially in a smaller boat. So the bib lures and stuff like that, we will probably give I'll probably give them a bit more of a shot this year, or the bibless I should say, like the Ozeri Bonitas or something like that, after the success that we had on the yellowfin this year, and I'll go through rigging them a bit later on. And then taglines is a huge one, is another big difference between marlin fishing and the bluefin fishing. So most boats here will be set up for marlin fishing with generally just a single clip on the outrigger line. You'll have your halyard with a clip on it. Some people will fish taglines when they're marlin fishing, but a tagline basically helps reduce your drop back. I was going to have my boat here as a demonstration, but I didn't bring it because it's raining, and I didn't figure any of you guys would want to go outside. So I left that back at Marco. And I have bought basically an example. I will show that after, so for anyone who wants to see it a little bit more close up in person, I have it as an example there, so we can go have a look at that afterwards. But basically a tagline reduces your drop back. As this nice illustration shows, from the reel going to the line, basically your tagline will be the length of your outrigger, and that there is reducing the drop back compared to going to the tip of your outrigger and back. You're dropping out a whole bunch of drop back. Usually in the demonstration that I do outside, it'll drop, like if your outrigger's say 18 feet long, you'll be reducing 18 feet of basically drop back, which will then keep the pressure on the hook. When the tunas are eating the lures, they do have quite a hard bony mouth, and any time where they have a bit of slack line, they might have a chance to shake the hook and drop it. And the hookup rate with taglines is exceptionally better than it is with just a straight clip. If you're going to just run a clip and that's your only option, the only thing I recommend is just running your clip incredibly tight so that it sets the hook on the bite. Marlin fishing, we often will set quite a light clip, so when a striped marlin comes in, something like that will knock the lure and turn. Basically, we want the exact opposite. We want the fish to hook up instantly from the bite. Okay, so yeah, I do have a little bit of a demonstration here, so after the talk you can come up and have a look and actually see how we put it together. And if you want to do any of the rigging or obviously in the future, we can also help you back at the shop. We can go through all that as well. All right. Gear, rods and reels. So trolling, standard trolling, 24 and 37 kilo. The fish down there in the last recent years have dropped a little bit in size. Like the average fish now seems to be more that 25 to 60 kilo fish. Back in the day, the average fish was 76 kilos. And it has dropped a little bit, so 24 to 37 is fine. Don't forget the fish can get up to 170 something kilos. I think the world record is set off Waiho Bay at 170 something kilos. So I personally still don't go too light, and I still want to be able to hold at least 500 metres of line. Because they are a schooling fish, once we hook one fish, we do want to continue going for a little while to try and get the 2s and 3s or getting the pack attacks. And they can take a little while to raise once you've hooked one. Top shots, either 50 or 80 pound top shot if you're fishing braid. And then for your wind-on leaders, etc., we generally drop everything down. So marlin fishing, if you're fishing 400 or 500 pound, we'll drop our leaders down to say 200 pound wind-ons, and then say fishing 200 to 300 pound bite leaders. I'll go through squid chains and stuff in a further slide as well to help with that. But the fish can be a little bit more shy compared to most fish, so we do want to drop the leaders down a bit. Okay, lures. Picking a spread of lures. Now I've bought a whole bunch of nice lures. Can I get rid of this? Yeah. Perfect. Don't want that. And you'll notice that I've got a whole bunch here on the table, okay? And when it comes to picking a spread of lures, because when we're fishing off Yeehaa, it is quite rough. Not everything's going to work. And this is something I try and explain. One, because it's rough, some lures will struggle. Two, we're going slower. So because we're doing that 5.5 to like 6.5 knots, a lot of lures will struggle to swim. And then three, we're now putting them 2 waves further back. And because we're dropping the lures further back, it'll make a lot of lures even more sluggish. So you'll notice I have like a lot of small slant head lures. So I really like the Undertaker. So like these little Undertakers are great. And I found at that slower speed, these lures will still run really well, even in the longer positions. Things like the Here for the Party, again, just like a smaller slant face has done really well for me. But then you'll also notice I've got like a lot of Lumo. Okay, so like all of these, I do have a whole box of other lures there rigged as well. But when you're picking a spread to go down there, I'll always pick a whole bunch of Lumo. So all these are luminous. I think I have like maybe like 4 or 5 other lures that are like Lumo skirts that has a Lumo under. Those are both fully luminous. For me, first thing in the morning, so like the first like hour or two of day, or first hour or two into the day, I'll always fish a minimum of like 3 Lumos, and then as that sun starts to come up, I'll then swap them out for more natural colours, so something more like an Evil, or just like a more natural bait fish colour. I'll generally leave 1 or 2 Lumos out, but it's just something that I've found that first thing in the morning, for that first hour of the day, any of those Lumos seem to get bit much better. Now, something else that always gets talked about is like, how many lures do you need? Everyone only reckons you only need 5 because you're only running 5 rods. But I'll also take a whole bunch of different lures. Say like, if those are my squid colours, I'll take a whole bunch of different squid colours in different size and shaped heads. So depending on the conditions, I then have a lure to run in that. So I'll just grab one more out. And this is a great example. Like this little Rambo's been great for me in the past. It's only quite a small lure, but a big problem that I've found, especially down there if I'm running it on my rigger, and on my on my short riggers back on the 6 wave, and I've got a 37 kilo top shot, if I'm fishing in say 15 to 20 knots of wind, that lure is going to blow out, and like it's going to struggle to stay in the spread. Sometimes and same with that lure there. These lures, I catch heaps of them on, but when it's real windy, it feels like my lure's fishing behind some other boat. Like I'll be traveling and in my down sea turn, that lure will be, I don't know, like 50 meters away from my boat. And it's just because of the size of the lure, it can't handle the weight of pressure on the line because it's the size of it. And that's where I'll have like a bigger version or something like that, which has a bit more weight to it, which will then help hold that line a bit tighter and keep it actually behind my boat and not behind somebody else's. So for every colour, I always have a few different head shapes depending on the conditions that I'm fishing in. So if it gets real calm and one of those gets a bit lazy, then I'll have a squid version of like a small slant face to put in its position, so then get the lure working again. All right. For rigging, you'll notice all these lures here are basically rigged with twin hooks. I've tried everything. I've run them with singles, doubles. The double hook rig is definitely a more effective hook rig for catching them. We'll always run that front hook as close as we can to the lure. When we're marlin fishing, often we'll want the hooks further back in the lure, but these tunas are trying to eat the lure head first. So when that tuna comes up on the lure, he is trying to swallow that whole lure. And because of that, we want that first hook as close as we can to the lure head. Other than that, we then have the back hook sitting, basically we try and keep it inside the skirt, but as close to it as we can. We don't want that back hook also just hanging really far out the back. And you'll notice I've also got quite small hooks. So I'm a big fan of twin 8-0s. When running a single hook, if you were to run a single hook in a little lure like this, you could run like a single 9 or a single 10. But the trouble is if you were to go to twin 9s, the weight of the hooks will affect how the lure swims. And if the rig's not perfect, like with a bigger hook, the more weight the hook has, if the rig isn't perfectly like 180 or perfectly in line, any twist in it can then basically affect the lure and make it spin, and especially because we're going at that slower speed. Going at that lower speed, anything in your rig that's not perfect, the lure can tend to spin a bit more. Where the smaller hooks, I find I get less of that happening, and the rigs last me a little bit longer. The only time we then go up to like the 9.0 style rig is once the lure head is too big for an 8-bar. I find that the hookup rate on like a, say like that's like a BTK size, it's quite a bit bigger lure. The hookup rate's a little bit worse because the hook kind of gets hidden in that lure. So then we go up to like a 9.0. Again, keeping them close together. For IGFA reasons, the hooks need to be at least a hook length apart. And what that means is that that hook can't just be, like the eye of that hook can't be inside that hook. So basically that hook rig there is legal. And again, sitting concealed inside the skirt. Okay. Leaders, I'm generally fishing 200-pound fluorocarbon. The fluorocarbon is basically because of the teeth on the southerns. The southerns have pretty nasty teeth, especially in the bigger models. They will often also completely swallow the lure, so we get a lot of people catch fish with the lures stuck down, and like the hook rigs are in their throat. I had a mate catch one, and you couldn't even see the hooks. Both hooks are concealed in the throat latch of the tuna, which means the hooks on the corner of its mouth are rubbing on the leader the entire fight. The fish can be 80 to 150 kilos, so after a 2-hour fight, if you're running a mono leader, those teeth there are going to wear on that leader. So the fluorocarbon is just a lot more abrasion resistance. Not so much for like the visibility, but for the abrasion resistance is huge.
So, Luke,
Yeah.
the leaders, how often should you change them?
Just as wear and tear.
Last year, they're still good. They don't.
Well, it depends how many fish you're catching on them. Personally, you know, if you don't catch anything on them, then they're fine forever. Fluorocarbon doesn't actually deteriorate. So fluorocarbon doesn't deteriorate, luckily for us, compared to monofilament. Monofilament absorbs water where fluorocarbon does not, so you don't have to worry about it deteriorating over time. But if you are catching fish on it, their teeth will obviously wear on it. So generally after a fish, we'll always check the leader in front of the lure to make sure it's not worn. If it's fine, we'll put it back out. Other than that, we will have spare rigs and leaders to swap them out while we're fishing. All right, and while I'm on that, like I actually, just a small little tech tip. I try and keep, it's something I do through marlin fishing and through everything I do. You'll notice pretty much every lure that I have here, I've shortened them down, but they all take the same size rig. And it's something that's huge. I'm fishing on a trailer boat. It's often I'm taking a whole bunch of mates that don't know anything about fishing, or the boys are putting the lures back out and there's not a lot of time to re-rig. I keep everything pretty much uniform, so then I can then take a bag of pre-made rigs that are identical to the lures that I'm fishing. One, it means I don't have to rig every lure I own, so I can have a box of lures. I do the exact same thing while I'm marlin fishing. I've got a big box of lures here with 50% of them not rigged, 50% of them are rigged, because obviously, when you go to leave home and you're picking lures for the trip, and you'll pick some, you think those ones look cool, and then there'll be a couple sitting there and you think, shit, imagine if I need that one. I don't want to go down there and not have that one. But if that one's not rigged, a good idea that I have is that I'll have spare hook rigs all pre-rigged so that while I'm down there, if I do catch a fish I'm on the water, I have a hook rig that has a pre-made hook rig. I've got a piece of chafe tube and a crimp already on it. If I want to decide to run one of those other lures, it takes me 2 seconds to rig it. If I'm out there in the rough, I'm not struggling to try and get that lure either back fishing or run one that I want to change, So a good bit of pre-planning, especially for fishing down there. And good for if you're just fishing anywhere else as well. All right, leaders are quite short. We'll run them 1.5 to 2 meters, generally sub 2 meters. A lot of this is to do with when we're taking a fish, we don't want to be grabbing a leader. Tunas have a shocking habit of coming to the boat and then getting close to the boat and then taking off at the last second. I've had multiple times when I've been trying to gaff a fish, and basically as we're about to gaff it, the fish take off and run another 100 to 150 meters. If you have somebody leadering the fish that isn't super confident and has a wrap on it, or just basically the leader gets tangled around something, there's a chance for it to basically, as the fish goes to take off, to shock either the hook or the leader and break it off. I hear heaps of this happening down there. I hear it all the time on the radio. Guys get fish to the boat. As they're about to take the fish, they then call up on the radio 10 minutes later, oh, we lost that one, we broke it off. And as that fish goes to take off, if it's 100 kilos, it has a lot of power. Now, if you're holding the leader, your reaction time's quite slow, But if you've got it through a rod and your angler is basically winding the fish right to the rod tip, as that fish goes to take off, the drag in the rod will absorb that for you. So we try and keep the leaders quite short. The other reason we do that too is for when we clip them onto the back of a squid chain, we're then not wanting to make it too long then either. Okay. How much more have I got on trolling? Squid chains. I think this is the last slide, and then we'll get on to jigging. So squid chains, do we use them? For me, they've been a huge part of my success for bluefin fishing. It's these silly little things here. This one's called the Raster. This is a mini floppy. This is my favorite squid chain. Now, they're quite short, so you'll see some of them are quite long. Some of these I have trimmed down and made them shorter again. And it's the whole thing with being able to deal with the fish boat side. The longer this is, the more leader there is that you then have to deal with at the side of the boat. Now, a squid chain comes into its own for a few reasons. Some days we'll run a whole bunch of them. Some days we won't run any. But a huge thing that a squid chain does is that if you are trying to run a small lure like that, which has no weight, the squid chain, because of the resistance in the water, will straighten your line. Okay, so it will create a lot more resistance. By straightening your line, like again, your rigger's back 6 wave, okay, so it's like 50 to 60 meters behind your boat. If you have a big bow in your line, when the fish eats that lure, there is a lot of slack before it comes tight. Having the squid chain in front of the lure will help maintain tension on that line, and funny enough, it will help your hookup rate. Secondly, it will also help hide anything. So the bubbles and splash that this will put off will then help hide your leader and help hide any imperfections. I have lots of customers that don't want to like downsize their leaders or anything like that. I just give them heaps of squid chains, and then it just helps hide all their stuff, so it's not as much of an impact. One thing though, I have heaps of guys that run just all squid chains, and I have been caught out. So I have had the odd day where a squid chain has not been my favorite thing. Some days we'll catch 80% with a squid chain. I have had the odd day, one in particular, where we were fishing and we caught one, I think we caught 5 for the day, and only 1 came on a squid chain. And during that day, we were fishing next to other boats catching, and we caught one without a squid chain. And then next minute, like we have another rod go off without a squid chain, and I had about 3 out. And by the end of the day, we had 1 squid chain out because it just wasn't working for us. So don't get too stuck in the mindset that, obviously you do have to just change to how they are feeding. And then the same thing with birds. We'll also run birds, so small birds like these or the malolos, or there's heaps of different types of birds you can run. But again, these splashing along on the surface, one will help keep pressure on the line and also hide any lead or anything like that. So great to have a whole selection. Matching colour to the lure. You'll see I have a whole bunch of like squid and like bright colours and colours to match lures. It feels nice matching the colour of the squid chain to the lure, but I don't think it makes any difference. So, but on a day when I'm running 4 different lures with squid chains, yeah, it feels better for us as we put the lures out. But like if I'm on a day when they're eating squid chains, I'm going to be running 4 different squid chains, so it does pay to have a whole bunch of them. If you're going to buy a whole bunch, I just buy different colours. So then at least I can try and match them to the lures.
Do you ever run them on their shotguns?
Yep, I'll run them in every position. I'll run them everything from the short corner all the way back. Often when I start the day, like I've put up here, I'll be running a couple of squid chains and 1 bird. Generally when I start the day, I'll run a couple of lures naked and a couple of lures with a chain. So I'll often alter them. So like if my short corner has a squid chain, my long corner will have nothing on it, and then my short rigger will have a squid chain, and then my long rigger will have nothing, and then the shotgun might have a bird. So I'll have at every distance of the boat, I'll have an option for the fish for if they want it. And then once I start getting a few bites, if I'm keying into them eating a squid chain, then I'll start adding them into those areas where I don't have them.
And do you think birds are better than, like, being quite bloody expensive birds? Are they that much better than the...
That's up to you. That's up to you. Some, I find, the only thing I highly recommend is you'll notice I have quite a small bird. There are some very big birds on the market, and I find they do. I don't generally like anything that has a real soft wing. So there's some with soft wings, and I find they can often turn and then pull under the water. And when they turn and pull under the water, they'll pull your lure out of the rigger, and you'll get a false bite. So I do like a smaller, hard bird, kind of like a 6 to 10 inch bird. And the idea behind that is they don't seem to like grip into the water as much as something with a soft wing. You know, so yeah, some of the softer ones I had issues with that. So I just like a smaller, hard-winged bird.
What about teasers, Luke?
No teasers. No teasers. Every lure behind your boat should have a hook in it. Okay, so I generally don't tow any dredges or teasers. Everything should have a hook. If you run a spreader bar, put a lure on the back with a hook. If you run a squid chain, put a lure with a hook on the back, because they will eat everything. All right, guys, so nighttime fishing. This part's probably not going to be as long as the trolling part. Luckily for most people, they've done quite a bit of jigging in the past. So nighttime jigging for the southern bluefin. This became a craze last year. It was obviously when it started happening, people were running down there or running out there into the darkness. I ended up doing pretty much only night fishing last year, just so I could, because I thought it was pretty cool, and I wanted to try something different. I've done heaps of the daytime trolling, and what we ended up, obviously with the fishing previously, when the daytime was real calm, the fishing was real average, and when the fishing's a little bit rougher, say that like 10 to 15 knots, you know, obviously not too rough that you can't fish in a small boat, but rough enough to where the surface is a little bit more disturbed. I was leaving that to trolling. So I'd be trolling when it was that slightly rougher weather, and then when it was really calm, those nice glass off days and stuff like that, when the daytime troll was a bit slow, we would then go night jigging. To the point where the accommodation that I was staying in down at Yeehaa Bay, we were hiring the rooms during the day, and then Nicola, who looks after us down there, she was great. I called her up and I was like, can I get some accommodation for these 3 days? And she was like, no, we're booked out. And I was like, any chance I can just rent the room from 9 a.m. to like 5 p.m.? And she was like, yeah, sure. And we were basically going back when it was real calm during the day, sleeping during the day, and then going back out and fishing all night long. And so I did quite a bit of it. Obviously, there are people out there that have done more than me, but I'll just share a bit of the experience I had from down there and what we learnt from the fishing. So when do we start jigging at night? Now, the first couple of trips we're down there, we would fish right until dark. Like I would troll lures right up until dark, until we couldn't see, pull the lures in, and then start looking around to start jigging. The last couple of trips I was down there, we had guys hooking up before, like just as the sun was hitting the horizon, but it was still light enough to see. There were guys hooking up on the radio, calling up saying they're hooked up, people asking them what they were doing, and the guys are like, oh, we're already jigging. And to me, I was like, oh yeah, well, we had lures out, so we'd quickly pull our lures in and then start looking for sign to start jigging on them. So from that, when we were fishing the afternoons, we're starting to notice those lantern schools, that photo that I showed you earlier in the evening. We'd start noticing those schools lifting up above about 120 metres by about 5:30 in the afternoon. Once they were above about 120 metres in the water column, we could then hit them with the jigs. So basically, as soon as you see that bait lifted above a point where you can get a jig down to it, I'd start jigging. So for me, I was probably starting a little later than I should have been some of those nights, but it was a good lesson for me to learn. And then some of the best bites we had was first thing in the morning. So again, like a lot of fish species, either like a change in the tide or a change in something can make the fish move. As the daylight comes, those lanterns are going to start dropping again, and we had some exceptional fishing right on daybreak. So just as that sun was about to break the horizon, we had some exceptional fishing, and I'm guessing it's as those fish start moving, the bluefin are probably moving and feeding on them as well, because obviously the fish have settled in for a little period over the night, and as they're starting to drop back down, that was a key time for us. Where are we doing this? Now, it's pretty much the same places that we're trolling during the day. The identical areas that we're fishing during the day. When we're heading out there at night, I generally start looking from about the 800 metre mark. I'll slow down and then start sounding, and then we're sounding all the way out to where we're fishing. So later in the season, there's a lot of fish being caught in like 14 to 1700 out wide. We were starting our night fishing out there. Early in the season, we were fishing back between 800 and 1000 metre mark. And that will just vary depending on how the bite is at that time of the year. Best ways to find them. Now, this was quite an interesting kind of situation. Again, I've only done 5 nights out there jigging for them. I've obviously got all you guys and a whole bunch of customers that come and report back to us in how they do it. And I've got a heap of mates around the places that I've spoken to post the jigging about what they were up to. And there's kind of three main ways that people were kind of finding them and then jigging for them. Now, some guys were just heading out there and doing a long drift, so they would drive out till they found sign and doing a long drift in that area and just basically jigging. In the same night, myself and then two mates were doing 3 different styles of fishing, and we all caught bluefin that night. So I don't know the perfect one just yet. The second one was what I was doing, which was driving around. I would slowly tick around at like 2 to 4 knots all night long until we marked fish or marked bait, which I'll show you shortly. And we'd just slowly like lurk around the 1,000 metre mark. If there was nothing happening, we'd drive out a little bit deeper. We'd be listening obviously on the radio to where other people are catching and seeing what other things are going on. But we'd basically just drive around looking for sign. As soon as we saw sign like we would be kingy fishing, we'd pull the boat out of gear, click it into reverse, and then start jigging. If we didn't hook up, we'd basically then just start driving around again. Now that's what I did probably 90% of the time I was down there. And then another method that people were using is an electric motor and spot locking. Some of the boys down there fishing next to me did exceptionally well, just finding sign, spot locking over top of the sign, and then just jigging. And you probably find even if they're not marking fish, the action of the jigs going down through the bait and back up will probably attract fish from a wider area. And then they were doing exceptionally well doing that. They were slightly chumming at the same time, but there is like a knot, just over a knot of current out there. And they were needing bigger jigs, so they were generally running like 400 gram jigs because of the current that they were fishing in. Where us driving around and the guys drifting, we could generally fish with a smaller jig, like a 2 to 300. But those 3 methods in one night alone, yeah, myself and 2 mates, we all did a different method, and by the end of the night, we all caught heaps of bluefin each. So it kind of just depends on what you can do. So try a few of them. For me, I'm still driving around until I find sign and then drifting on, or either fishing heavily on the sign, and then if I'm finding really good bait sign, then I'm just drifting on, fishing on it, okay? What we're looking for, this slide here is a couple of images. Now on the left, it does look quite cluttery, but that there is basically the lanternfish, so it looks like heavy clutter, but that stuff there is those small little fish. You'll see inside the fish there are some red marks. I run my screen at quite a high clutter compared to most people would probably do, and you'll see those red marks in there. There's some down at 90 metres, there's some all the way up to about 45 metres, but those are all southern bluefin feeding in amongst the lanternfish, and so that's, as we're slowly driving around, that's what we're looking for. On the right hand side of the screen, we've basically just marked a school of tunas, and you'll see on the left hand side I've started marking a few, and then there's a few breaks in the screen. That'll be as I've clicked into reverse and I'm backing up so the jigs can go down, and then basically we're then jigging through the heavy sign, and we caught fish equally as good doing both of those things. But that's what we're kind of looking for. We're either looking for this heavy bait, and it'll look like a solid bottom on your screen. At some points it'll black out your screen and it'll look like a hard bottom. They can get incredibly dense. All right. They can get incredibly dense, and then other times we'll just mark actually individual schools of tuna, and we'll stop and drop jigs on them. Now the gear. So when we first went down there, we just started fishing with standard kingy gear. Obviously, I'd never jigged for. We've caught quite a few southern bluefin actually during the day and just on standard kingfish gear, but I'd never really done the nighttime jigging. So we just started off with normal kingfish gear, PE6 to PE8 sets. In the past, trolling for them, for anyone who's caught a southern bluefin, they're not the strongest fighting fish sometimes. They can be a bit of a wet rag. And I've had the odd big battle on trolling gear, but most of the fights have been pretty weak. So when we first went down there, we just took our kingy gear, and admittedly the first trip I went down there, we caught smaller models like that, 30 to 60 kilos. Some of them didn't pull any drag, and they were pretty easy to catch. And then the second trip I went down there, we bumped into a whole bunch of bigger models. We bumped into a whole bunch of bigger fish. One round of beers. We bumped into a whole bunch of bigger models, and by that, I weighed one that was 86 without its tail gutted and gilled. So it's like up there above that 90 kilo plus range. That fish there, I fought for an hour, and at an hour it got sharked, and at an hour after it got sharked, I don't think it was even anywhere near being done fighting, and I was pretty happy that it got sharked at the boat and it stopped fighting, because I was pretty done at that point. I was absolutely buggered, and we also got spanked by a couple of big fish where they were just like insane runs, like 300 meter plus runs from a fish where the week before we were catching them and they weren't pulling a centimeter of drag, and then the next week it was like the craziest fish I've ever fought. And so we kind of started changing the gear we were taking. Admittedly, the kingfish gear that most people have will catch 70% of the tunas you will encounter. But for myself, I'm preparing to try and catch 100 kilo plus fish. There are a lot of big southerns down there. There were fights that went for 5 hours. One of the boys down there, they fought one for 5 hours and then eventually broke it off. Sato, who works at Yeehaa, he fought one for 2 hours, and after 2 hours and fatigue, they end up just pulling the hook, probably just due to fatigue, and they could have just dropped the rod for a second and end up pulling the hook. And so I'm basically preparing for more so that fish, not preparing for the small, like average ones. I kind of just recommend taking something that if you do hook 100 kilo plus southern, that you're not either going to lose it, be spooled, or break the rod, or you've traveled a long way to go there to try and catch one and then be undergunned. So the gear we're using, we're obviously still mechanically jigging, so we're still using a jigging rod, okay? You can fish spin, and don't get me wrong, there's heaps of places around the world they fish spin. And I was actually showing someone videos today from Japan, and the guys are fishing with spin. They're like, why don't you do that? That looks like fun. And I was trying to explain that, like, obviously you can, but I'm trying to find the easiest way to catch them. I'm not the biggest person there, so, like fighting one for an hour on an overhead setup, I was buggered. So fighting one on a spin rod where you have to lift the rod to turn the handle sounds like another form of hell. So I highly recommend an overhead style setup. One with an overhead, it allows you that when the fish is doing big runs or pulls quite heavy, you can lay the rod down on the gunnel. You don't have to worry about holding off the gunnel. 2, it gives you an overhead reel, okay? I kind of suggest anything that has lugs. So like an LD55 is the narrowest Saltiga that comes with a set of lugs. Now the reason for that is that after, say, 40-minute fight, if you are starting to fatigue, it is very easy to drop the rod. Obviously, the jigs we're running are 200 to 400 gram jigs. There's a good chance that if you take any weight off the rod, the jig can just fall out. After a big fight, the jig hook is going to have worn a pretty big hole in the fish's mouth. So being able to, obviously, if you have to and you don't want to have to give up the rod, being able to go into a harness and put a harness on is a bonus. We want something, preferably I want something that can carry at least like 400 to 500 meters of line. I had a fish, that fish that I was fighting, it did, like its biggest run was 270 meters. And I was at the point where the knot was there. I had like 30 meters of line left, and I was thumbing it to the point where it was either going to break off or stop. For me, it turned and ran back to the surface, but it was doing well over 200 meter runs consistently. And at that point there, the spool was getting so small that I was getting into trouble every time it did a run. So something like this that will hold up to 500 meters of line is basically what we're after. And then also having the 2-speed option. Okay, so generally our jigging reels, when we're mechanically jigging, we want the lightest reel possible so that you can jig all day long. When we're looking for these bluefin, I was spending probably 80% of my night driving around. Like, we're not spending the entire night jigging. If there wasn't sign to jig on, we weren't jigging. And then as soon as we found bluefin sign, we were generally getting bit. So we weren't doing like a whole bunch of jigging. We weren't spending hours mechanically jigging all night long. What that allows is for us to use a bigger, heavier reel. So having the 2-speed option means that when you're fighting a fish, you can just click into low speed, and then with the overhead rod, not having to pump the rod. Like a spin reel, to turn the handle, you have to pump the rod. With the overhead rod, click into low gear, you can literally hold your arms straight, and then as the boat goes up and down the waves, you can just turn put a little bit less drag on it, you can just turn the handle. And it makes it like incredibly easy to fight a big fish, especially when a lot of people probably haven't fought, like coming from kingy fishing, haven't fought a fish that's 100 kilos on a jigging set, and they're incredibly heavy. Like the weight of the fish alone without fighting the fish, the weight of his body weight in the water is incredibly hard to lift through the rod. So just having that low speed where you can just click the reel into low speed and just being able to turn the handle as you go up and down the waves made it incredibly easy to fight fish. For the rods, obviously looking for something P6 to 8, preferably like a P8 rod, and by P8 P8's like 80 to 120 pound rod, so the heaviest in the overhead rods that you can find. Obviously we're still wanting to do some sort of jigging with it, so a jigging style rod, but just in that heavier overhead class. So that's my recommended. So from the overhead, just a couple of tips. Things we're looking for: line capacity, having some harness lugs on it obviously would be great, and then having the 2-speed. The other thing with this reel too, having the lever drag is a real big one as well. During the fights, the runs are incredibly fast. Now, when you're fighting like a 100 kilo tuna on 80 wide, the spool is so big that when it's running, the speed, obviously the spool is spinning, but the size of the spool is so big. Once we go down to a small jigging reel and a tuna goes on like a 200 to 300 meter run, your spool becomes so small that it's spinning so fast that the line can heat up and break going over the guides. And so that's why the lever drag's great, because as that fish is running, you can back the drag off, and then once it stops running, you can put the drag back up. So having the star drag was a little bit tough, because every time you back it off, once you go back on the drag, it was quite hard to like know how much drag to put back on it. So having a lever drag is also great as well. All right. Now for leader setup, last year when we started fishing, we fished everything from just straight 100-pound fluoro all the way just to straight 200-pound fluoro. Since I'm talking at a club that probably has an IGFA affiliated club with it, if you want to fish IGFA with the jigging gear, you can. And it's very similar to how the Americans do their nighttime jigging, which is they'll run, like for this we need to run basically a minimum of 5 meters, or run 6 meters of 130-pound mono, and then we'll run a short bite leader of 200-pound fluorocarbon, which I've got on this example here. Okay, so we've got the 130-pound tied down to a swivel, and then on a short section we have about 400 mils of 200-pound fluorocarbon, and again that's just for the teeth, for in case the fish swallow the jig. Now we ended up having to take quite a few fish last season due to the fish completely swallowing the jigs. So I highly recommend having that short piece of bite section just to help with that abrasion, and then having that 5 to 6, well, we kind of recommend 6 meters of 130-pound, which then makes it IGFA legal for if you want to weigh it for your club or anything like that. Okay. That rain's getting pretty heavy now, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Yep. That is cheating, yep, of course. You can do it though, nothing against it. Yeah, and obviously, sorry, say that again? No, so the reel is spooled with 500 meters. This reel here's got 500 meters of 100-pound braid, and then we have 6 meters of 130-pound mono, and then a short bite section of fluorocarbon.
So it's almost like you can use the hook in here.
Yep, yep. Yeah, like a lot of people will have a small lever drag reel like this. Like there is an LD60, and the only reason we kind of go down to the LD55 is to have a narrower reel. So when we are jigging, it makes it a bit easier to jig, especially since you're jigging in the darkness, you know. Like we do have lights on in the boat, but you are out there at night jigging. So the narrower reel just makes it a bit easier as well. Okay. No, but luminous jigs. So jigs that we're going to run. Yeah, well, I'm in reverse. So I'm driving around the whole night, so yeah.
How do you stop the top hooks coming back up?
I'll get to that. So I'll try and leave a few of the questions till the end on this one, because I've only got a few more to go through this, and then we'll do all the questions at the end. When it comes to jigs, glow, 100% glow. It seems to be the most jigs that glow get a lot of bites. For me, colour I haven't actually found too much of a preference, but definitely having glow. So like all these jigs here, all the jigs you'll see up here that have a whole bunch of teeth marks through them, all covered in glow. And then like for shape wise, this jig here is obviously weighted at the top, so it's going to have a lot of action. So either top weighted, center weighted, something that's going to have a lot of action on the fall. And I'm going to get into that in a short section about, on a short piece about why we want a lot of action on the fall. For rigging, the rigging of them is quite interesting. Originally jigging, you know, like a lot of people when we buy a jig, we're all told to, you know, like if you have a solid ring or split ring, to tie to the hook, to obviously then have the strongest piece through the connection of the jig. Now, the bluefin eat a lot on the fall. to the point where, like, I thought myself I was getting about 50% of our bites on the drop. So I've spoken to some customers. I was speaking to a customer last week, and he reckons that they were getting up to like 70% on the fall. He was getting to the point where they'd just wind back up and re-drop the jig. So having a jig like these that are either top weighted or center weighted, giving you that action on the fall, is then going to get you a lot of bites. Now, the trouble is as that jig is falling, your top hook that you'd normally be kingy fishing with, like a kingfish eats by inhaling the jig, in like an induction feeder. So as he comes in, he's going to induction feed and pull that hook into his mouth. As that jig's falling and that bluefin comes in to eat it, as that jig's falling, most of the time your front hook is going to be away from the jig and can miss the fish as he's falling, and we miss heaps of bites on the drop. Like, I mean, the hookup rate on the drop for us was shocking. Now, we've then gone to basically a top and bottom hook. Okay, and so the idea behind that is that as that jig's falling, if you are trying to get it down and that top hook does slide up to the top, actually this one's probably a better example, as that top hook slides up, this bottom hook will then also fall into the body of the jig, and you will then end up catching a lot of fish on the bottom hook. So we're actually putting a lot of pressure through these jigs. Touch wood, haven't had any fail yet. And we're basically split ring onto the jig with our top assist, and then we're just split ringing another hook onto the bottom of the jig. Okay, now there's a couple of different setups like I've shown there. Top hook, that's your standard kingy way. Just a single off the bottom, 2 assist hooks, and then 2 longer assist hooks. Now, not every jig, I've kind of set these up a little bit back to front here. Not every jig can handle 2 long, like you'll notice both of those are quite long assists. And there will be some jigs you'll go to put them together and those 2 long assists will touch or tangle over each other, which is where we'll put a long assist on the top, like a normal assist, and then we have what we call a short assist, which we use a lot for in like topwater fishing and stick baiting, just a short assist on the bottom, and then that ensures that there's no way that those 2 hooks can foul each other on the way down, okay? And then that's how I'll generally start the night fishing, with 2 hooks. If you're planning on catching, releasing these fish, I'd highly recommend just going to a bottom hook. With most of the bites happening on the drop, that system there seems to be the most effective for your hookup rate and makes it a lot easier to release the fish, because then you have a jig to hold on to while trying to take the hook out of the fish's mouth. Fishing with twin hooks is great for catching them, but it is pretty dangerous where it's boat side, and I highly recommend, if you're going to fish with twin hooks, either have a de-hooker or something to keep your hands away from those hooks. And that's where, if you are planning on catching, releasing, I do just recommend going to the 1 hook on the bottom. And then you'll notice another little tip there is the swivels. So we run a heavy power swivel. It's called a power swivel. We'll run them in anything from a 2-burrow to a 5-burrow, they're called. And it's just a heavy duty swivel. This one's rated to like 250 kilos, but they're just a strong swivel to take any twist out of your line or when you're fighting the fish. The fish will pinwheel a lot when you're fighting them, and just having some sort of swivels in the system will help alleviate that. Obviously, if you're just tying straight to the jig, we have one on the jig, and then, you know, in the system where we're running a short bite leader, we're actually running 2 swivels in that system. Okay, but yeah, incredibly strong swivels. All right. The jigging technique. Now, one bonus for everyone here, and myself included, is jigging for them doesn't have to be an incredibly fast, active style of jigging. With most of the fish coming on the drop, or say 50% of our bites coming on the drop, 1, that makes it super easy. And 2, we get a lot of fish with a small action. So we found doing very hard, high mechanical action for them, like we would kingy fishing, was pretty ineffective. We caught a few doing that. Like, obviously there's going to be an exception to every rule, but we had incredibly good success just doing a very short, small action. Now, I think I spoke about this actually last year, going to the Seychelles and fishing for the dogtooth tuna over in the Seychelles. And me and my mate Mikey got to go on this trip over there, and when we were researching to go there, we'd see them jigging for the doggies, and they would do this like silly little action. They were doing this tiny little action where they would basically, sometimes they're not even doing a full rotation of the handle, and they're just slightly lifting the rod and doing like a quarter turn on every lift. And me and Mikey, being New Zealanders, we're thinking, these guys are just weak. it's obviously real hot and they're soft. And so we're going to go there and show them how to jig like Kiwis jig, and we're going to smash the shit out of them. And we get there, and we start jigging for these things, and we caught nothing. We caught nothing. We were getting heaps of bites on the drop, and then like I think it might have been like into the first day. I think Mikey was like, oh, we'll just try that stupid technique we watched them doing online, and we're doing this silly little jig and getting hammered by these doggies. And these, some of these are big fish. Like the biggest that was landed on that trip was about 65 kilos, and we're getting these nice sized doggies doing this stupid little jigging action. And then the more research I've done into it for the bluefin fishing here, they seem to take a very similar action. And it's just a very, very small movement and nothing too serious, nothing real big and fast, and just a very small action. The fish are sitting in quite a tight water column. As you would have seen on the screen, they're anywhere from, I was marking them from 40 to 80 meters. We've got multicolored braid, so I'd be dropping down to 90 or 100 meters and doing a slow jig up to about 40 meters and then just dropping the jig back down. And having that was just, it definitely helps a lot more when you've got the bigger reels. And it basically allowed us to fish with these bigger 2-speed reels because we're not doing that high intensity action that we would for kingies. All right, we're nearly there. I don't know, between a couple and say 6 or something, I don't know. Our best night we had to stop fishing because of the orcas, which are a bit of a pain. Quickly, before I get off the jigging thing, actually before I go into this, I'll just quickly, obviously I'll have this set up here so you guys can come have a look at it, but we just have a PR knot. Again, I do kind of feel like, sometimes I might not explain it perfectly because jigging's been around for so long. But on the jigging set, we do have a PR knot from the braid onto the leader, and then we're just either using a uni knot or crimping onto the setup there. I always feel that, I do forget sometimes that because jigging has been around for so long that some people might not have jigging sets or have done jigging. So we can go through that a little bit later on. But that's probably enough with the jigging, and I'll just do a couple of tips on nighttime safety with traveling. Now, Simon spoke about a whole bunch of stuff, and this is very, I feel, Waiho specific. So, lives were lost last year down there. I see some crazy stuff go on every year. The amount of boating I do down there, I'm generally not worried. I'm more worried about myself due to other boats down there than me hitting something. So, life jackets on board. Obviously, night fishing, again, I feel like, parrot, but everyone should be wearing one. PLBs and EPIRBs. Now, at night when you're traveling, nav lights and a riding light, so a white light on top. Radar, if you can have one, like, best thing ever for down there, so obviously you can keep an eye on everyone else. And I'm just going to put a comment in there to make yourself seen. The amount of times I'm cruising out of Waiho Bay in the dark, and there'll be a boat cruising out, like a small boat, like a 5 to 6 meter boat with nav lights on. They're not visible from the back, and I'll be able to see them on the radar, and I'll be traveling towards them thinking, what is it or where is it? All of a sudden I'll see like this guy's screen, because he'll move, and I'll be able to see his screen that then illuminates the boat, and they have nothing else apart from their nav lights on the boat. And so that's why I put, make yourself seen. If you don't have a lot of, obviously try and have your riding light, but if there are boats around you, I always either, it's not so much kosher having your underwater lights on while you're traveling, but for a boat coming up behind you, he'll be able to see your underwater lights. Often if I know a boat's traveling fast from behind me, if I see them on the radar, or if we can hear them coming, if I'm going slower out of the haven than everyone else, I'll just turn on my rear floodlight, and I'll just point it down into the deck of the boat. So not to blind the person coming up from behind us, but make sure that he can see me. There's a lot of big boats down there, like 8-10 meter trailer boats, and they'll have a lot of glare on their windscreens. If they've got lights on, they might have somebody talking to them. Just make sure that you're seen to everybody else down there as well. It's just something I have to say, because the amount of boats traveling with very little lights on them at night is amazing. And then I highly recommend having some sort of dim gunnel lights. So like inside your gunnels, having some sort of lighting. If something goes wrong at night, it's going to go wrong real fast. And so having something that's illuminating the cockpit, so you can either see if the boat's sinking or see if something's happening, so that you're not in pitch blackness when it happens and you're not trying to turn a light on. highly recommend it. Okay. Yeah. Yes.
I just have to say, Whitehouse last year with like floodlights, there were so many crashes at the ramp.
Yeah.
Purely because of
Floodlights.
crossing.
So again, like if you're heading out of the haven, or heading into the haven, preferably like your front spotlight is mean. If there's not a boat in front of you, front spotlights are great, and rear spotlights. I try and always turn my rear spotlight into the cockpit so that you're not blinding the boat behind you. And if you have a front spotlight on, the boat in front of you cannot see anything. So having smaller spotlights, either like a handheld or something like that, so that you're not illuminating the whole bay, or obviously just not having a boat in front of you. That is a huge one down there, eh? Like it's, yeah, these guys have these mean big wicked light bars and they turn them on and nobody can see nothing. Which is great for everyone, well, great for him, but it's not everyone else. I talk about it every year, taking of a fish, having multiple gaffs. This is something that at our shop, obviously I like eating them, and we obviously big into catch and release as well. We release plenty of southerns. But if you're going to take a fish, no point harming a fish to then lose it. Again, like your standard kingfish snapper gaffs are generally not going to be up to it. Your flying gaff is going to have too heavy a steel on it. So I've brought a couple of gaffs along that I would have shown you guys last year. Generally always a fixed head gaff, okay? 4 foot options with different size hooks. Real big fan of the spade gaff, obviously has a twisting handle. We get these custom made for us from a mate in Tauranga, but it has a swiveling handle in case the fish turns and so you don't break your wrist. Something you're looking for is something with a big enough gape to hold enough meat. Okay, so if you're gaffing a 100 kilo tuna, or like that one's like an 80 kilo one, the fish is quite round. When you go to gaff it with a very small hook, you'll only claim a small amount of meat, and then the fish is so strong that they can tear off the gaff and lose them. I have been on a boat where the guy had insufficient gaffs and we lost the fish, and then the fish just swims off to die, and like it's not going to be used for anything. It's basically just swimming down to the bottom to be eaten by crabs. So if you do choose to take a fish, having correct gaffs that can actually handle the size of the fish you're looking at taking. A flying gaff is like the opposite to what we'd normally take a fish with. A flying gaff, when the gaff goes in, the head can detach from the pole. If that happens, the tuna can then power off, and as he powers down, is going to gain momentum. When we're wanting to gaff a tuna, we want to gaff him like in the head or from like the pec fins forward, so that as we take the fish, we're going to lift his head out of the water and take his momentum away from him, or basically we're taking his momentum upwards. If you try and gaff it when the fish has got his head down, and as they feel the steel, he will then power on, and as he powers on, if the fish is his head going down, he will then go under the boat with a lot of power and break the gaff, which I've also seen. So when you go to take one, make sure the fish has either got its head horizontal or basically facing up, so that when you gaff it, you're lifting its head out of the water. Taking it with a gaff that can actually handle the size of the fish you're looking at. And then I recommend having like a second 4-inch gaff to then hold the fish, or even like in this instance, trying to lift it over the side, having multiple gaffs. They don't have like a bill or anything like that where you can hold on to, so basically you'll need multiple gaffs to then bring it on board. So I get a little bit of stick for obviously always talking about taking tunas, but I love eating them, and I just hate the idea of, I've seen a tuna lost at the side of the boat, so obviously if you are going to try and take one, make sure you have the correct gear to do it. All right, couple of quick things before I finish up. Looking after the tuna, kill bags, obviously having something big enough to put the tunas into, multiple kill bags if you're going to take multiple fish. Ice is a huge one. Getting ice down there can be a little bit tough, and it's super expensive. A couple of places down there sell ice, but it's like twice the price of Auckland. When we take ice down there, we'll take multiple chili bins. So like I'll take like multiple 70 to 100 litre chili bins full of ice. The fish will burn your ice really quickly, and I highly recommend when we take a fish, we'll bleed it. So as in the diagram there, we'll icky the fish, bleed the fish, and then gut and gill it. Gutting and gilling will help reduce the temperature inside its body. Then we'll generally leave it on the deck for a little bit. I'm not super quick to get it into the bag. At night time, we'll leave them on the deck for up to an hour. It's cold. The fish will be slowly reducing its body temperature. if you put the fish straight into a whole bunch of ice, especially if that's all your ice, the fish will burn all your ice and then you'll have nothing left. What we'll generally do is I'll have like a 100-litre chili bin full of salt ice on board. We'll take the fish that we're going to take. If we're going to take a few and we're in a hot bite, I'll wait until we process them all, leaving them on the deck and just keeping them cool with either salt water or at night. Once we put them into the bag, I'll sit them in there with the ice I have on hand. Obviously, once I finish fishing, obviously Simon showed a photo of a boat at the boat ramp with a whole bunch of blood that had poured out the back of the boat, which was not a great or smart idea. In that photo, one of the boys had just taken the bung out of the back of the boat, not realizing that there was bloody water in the bilge. So what I always try and do is I'll actually, as I'm coming back into the haven, before I get into the haven, I'll slow down. The fish that I have there on ice, I'll actually take out of the bag. They're generally going to burn that ice that you've put on them. Like if you've got multiple 50 to 100 kilo fish, you're not going to be able to have carried enough ice to fully ice those fish down. It'll be like a slurry underneath them. I'll take them out of the bag. I'll clean the bag over the side. I'll get rid of all the blood and everything before I get back into the haven. I'll clean the bag, put it back in the boat, put the fish back into it, and then when I get back onto shore, I'll then have another like 100-litre chili bin back of ice back on shore, which once I put that onto them, I'll find that that'll last that set of ice will last me 24 hours compared to the first set of ice because the fish have already come down in temperature. And because you're not dropping the ice into any water or anything like that, it'll last a hell of a lot longer for you. And I found that a better technique for then keeping them. I'm a big fan of looking after them, and I don't recommend cutting them up. I recommend cutting them up as late as possible. So as soon as you cut into the flesh or cut into the fish, you're going to open its flesh to bacteria. When we're down there, I'll take fish. I'll be happy to keep them on ice in a kill bag for up to like 3 days. With that fish on ice, gutted and gilled with no blood in it, the flesh is perfectly fine as it is. As soon as you cut the flesh, you're going to open it to bacteria. So if I cut that fish on day 1, by the time day 3 comes around, all the flesh that I've cut into has been opened to bacteria and the blood will start coming out of the flesh, start breaking down the fish. I'll wait until I get back to Auckland, up to 3 days later, and then process the fish then. And then even after that 3-day period, I'll still get then 10 days out of the fish after that, because the fish hasn't started, the meat's obviously started being looked after, but there's been no bacteria introduced to it, so the meat's not starting to rot yet, if that makes sense. And then obviously, when I'm cleaning it, I'll cut the pieces into portion sizes, just as small tips. And I'll actually vacuum pack it with paper towels. We'll wrap the meat in paper towels when we vacuum pack it. And then every day for the first 3 days, I'll then take the paper towels off and re-paper towel them. So any moisture coming out of the fish, we're then taking out, which is then creating bacteria and it's going to make the fish go off. And then after about day 3 or 4, you only have to do it every 3 days. And I've eaten the fish 12 days later after cutting them up and pull them out of the vacuum pack bag and they're still mint. It'll last for a very long time if you look after it. Okay. So a couple of tips there. And then as always, a little Yeehaa Bay Haven diagram for anyone who hasn't been there. So I spoke about this last year. The area on the far left I've marked as the boat ramp. So the boat ramp is 2 lanes wide, and then you can launch onto the gravel beach for anyone who hasn't been there. On the left-hand side, you'll see, if you're looking down the ramp on the left-hand side, there's that very first circle that I've marked. That there is a sandbank for anyone who hasn't been there. Pretty much from 2 hours before low to 2 hours after low tide, that sandbank will not allow you to get to the ramp. Your trailer, it'll be deep enough that you'll be able to back your trailer into the ramp, but your boat will hit the bottom about 8 meters away from your trailer. And it's basically from boats driving onto the ramp, it's just created a bit of a shell bank. When you look down the ramp, there is a ramp on the right-hand side. You can launch that ramp at all tides. We've launched boats up to 870 on that right-hand side, all the way to dead low. The square that I've marked is kind of what they call the haven. So that's where you'll sit and wait while you're waiting for your mate. So as he goes and parks the truck, majority of people there will drive off their trailer and then sit in that area waiting for their mate to go and park the truck so other boats can continue to either launch or retrieve. And the same in the retrieval process. You can drop your guy off on the wharf and then basically sit out in the haven and wait until your trailer's ready, just to not block up the ramp, especially if there's a lot of boats coming and going on a real busy weekend. Now the area I've marked, you do need to be careful. If you stray too far to the left, there are sunken rocks there. But everyone in the haven is pretty good, and you'll get used to the boats all being pretty close when you're in there. When you're coming up to the ramp, before I leave the jetty, on the right hand side, when you're looking down the jetty, on the right hand side is a ladder, which will help you get on and off the boat. On the left hand side, the last time I was there was a small rock pile that had been made. And so if you try and come up to the side of the jetty, you will hit the bottom. And generally we're just nosing up to the ladder. So we'll nose the boat up to the ladder. You generally will not be able to pull your boat alongside that jetty. Okay, if you try and come alongside, you'll generally hit the bottom, so just nosing the person into the ladder. As we're coming out of the haven, on the top there, I've marked a whole bunch of rocks. Now, the first little dot after the square is a marker pole. The marker pole is the biggest problem down there, is people will tend to head to that when they're coming home. As we come out of the haven, there is 2 heading markers, a red and a green. There's not always a red and a green. Most of the time I've been down there, there's generally only one left. Sometimes there's none. So be aware where they are on your chart. But I highly recommend making a waypoint when you leave the haven, putting a waypoint where those markers are, because a lot of boats end up coming in, they see the ramp and the direction you're coming back in from fishing. It looks like you're going directly to the ramp, but at high tide, all those rocks that have the X's over them are just slightly covered, and a lot of boats end up on the rocks there. And so as I leave the haven, I'll often just drop a waypoint here, so that when I'm coming back, if I'm not thinking or if I'm sitting on autopilot, the boat will naturally go back to the markers, because they are quite far away from the actual boat ramp. All right, so a few little tips around the haven, but basically that's all that I've got to talk about tonight. I probably have rushed over a few things and maybe skipped a few things, but you can obviously come. I'm going to be here for the next hour. We're going to be open to questions. Simon will probably come up and answer any questions you have about Coast Guard. And then obviously any further detail, come and see us at Yeehaa. But thank you for listening, and hope he helps you guys out. Yes.
I've got a couple of questions on the trolling stuff.
Yeah.
You showed those plugs with the mono going through them.
Yeah.
Is there anything wrong with using steel through the...
Like entirety of steel.
No, just a little length like that, because you also showed the picture with them with the teeth.
Yeah, so we have steel between the 2 hooks.
Right.
Yeah, but not in front of the lure. So there is steel joining the 2 hooks.
Is that I forget the acronym, the AFCA, whatever. The fishing regulations.
IGFA.
Yeah.
IGFA. To be within IGFA is more to do with like your hook spacing and stuff like that, with the wire holding between them. Can be anything.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the other question also with trolling is some guys think it's a good idea to put along with those plugs, they'll put a bibless lure.
Correct, yeah, which is in the diagram there. I had the positions for that.
Yeah, so with respect to that, they also, sometimes they'll say, no, the Rapala that you made, you know those X-wraps that you might drag for kingfish or something?
Yeah.
They say that those aren't strong enough and you need to go...
For some of the bigger fish, no, they aren't strong enough, no.
Yeah.
And also too, we do find a lot of trouble fishing them down there just because of the conditions.
So then they advocate that other thing, I forget what the
Yeah,
brand is.
the one that we advocate there is what we call a bibless. So it's a lure without a bib. And so the tow point's just further back on the lure. That lure there can be towed up to in over 20 knots.
Is that, I think they call it an
This is a Yozuri bonita. Yeah, Yozuri. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of different types of bib. Yeah, this is a bibless or a trembler or a marauder. There's heaps of different names for this type of lure. I just call them a bibless because it's a trolling lure that doesn't have a bib.
So
It's a hard body.
Japanese one. There's another
Yep.
one called Nomad.
Yep, yeah, there's Nomad. There is heaps of different brands of bibless trolling lure. Yeah.
Okay. And that goes up to 20 knots.
Yeah, you can fish that well over 20 knots. Yeah. Yeah, which the idea behind that is because when it's rough and you turn down sea and your boat increases with speed, you might go from 6 knots and you can end up doing 10 knots really quickly as you turn down a big swell. Other lures, like a bib lure, might then basically you'll go too fast for it and you can blow the lure out of the water and it'll jump out, where that lure there will always continue to swim no matter what speed you're doing.
You ever get them on the...
I haven't done a lot with them, but after the yellowfin season, like that lure there, we caught so many yellowfin on it this year. It was one of our best yellowfin lures. So after this year, I'm going to have to put a little bit more effort into them. I've always just trolled skirts for the simplicity of it because of the weather. Like a lot of this fishing has been depicted around the weather we're fishing in. Yeah. All good? Yep.
Have you had any luck trolling at night?
I haven't done any. I haven't tried. I've had the odd customer have luck, yes. Yeah, yeah. The only reason we don't have lures out is because as soon as we're marking sign, we're trying to get the jigs down to them as quick as possible, so we haven't put lures out at night. Yeah, yeah, man. I haven't, but I've had people do it, and huge issue with seals. Yeah, a lot of seals out there, and like you'll see heaps of them during the night, and they pester any bait you put down.
Are they good eating?
Wrong store. Any other questions? Yep.
Do you know if anyone's had a go at the shelf of the manicure?
No, but like commercially they catch like 5% of the southern bluefin for New Zealand out there at the 37. So they do get quite a few. There's the ATS mount, which is like 130 miles offshore on the 37 line. They catch, commercially they catch like 5% of our of them out there. Yeah, so they do get them out there. Nah, but when I spoke at counties last week, there's a whole bunch of those boys wanting to go fish there. It's just hard with the weather windows. And again, like for the daytime trolling, the reason why that stuff's so hard is when you get such nice weather to get out there, it's probably going to be the worst fishing you're going to experience, you know. So that's why Yeehaa Bay is so good, being able to fish it in that slightly rougher weather while still maintaining safety. Yeah. Oh yeah? Do you want to give them away? Yeah. Yes, sir.
You said something about you had a problem with the orcas one night.
Yeah, we got orchid. The orcas are becoming a bit of an issue every year, and they are stealing fish. We actually had to stop fishing that night because the orcas were taking our fish. Yeah, incredibly bad, actually. Yeah.
Well, this is jigging.
Yeah, jigging at night. So we're hooking them, and then once we're fighting them, the orcas are then coming and taking them, and either breaking us off or spooling us, or we're just getting the heads back. Yeah, until the point where we just had to stop fishing because anything we hooked would just get eaten by an orca.
Were they coming right up behind the boat?
They were swimming around the boat waiting for us. Yeah, and they wouldn't leave us. Like this was about 5 o'clock in the morning, and we just sat there and drifted all night. And through the night, I'd mark more tunas, and I'd be like, oh, well, I'll drop another jig and try, hook one, and then get orca'd again. And they were just in the area waiting. And any boats around us in that area, they were just sitting there waiting. We got up multiple times and ran 2-3 miles away. And as soon as we'd stop, they'd just be there again, straight away.
There's good posts, I think, from a pelagic guys.
Yeah.
Same thing happened this week out there.
They were eating their bottom fish, eh?
Yeah, they had to like go 12 miles away to
Yeah.
get away like this.
Yeah, I caught one, and as I caught it, we gaffed it and pulled it on board, and the orca like swam past the boat, and like, man, they look massive at night. Like, right where these boys are, like, right there, looks at you, shat myself, and I just picked up and just ran like 5 miles. I was like, fuck that, like they are huge. And I was thinking, now what they want is on our boat. And I was like, man, the male, his dorsal would be like 5 foot high, like it was huge. Yeah, like they're massive, and they're just circling the boat. And so you're just sitting in, yeah.
I like that on the garden patch a lot.
Yeah, for the blue nose, yeah.
Had that quite a few times.
Yeah, man.
Last one.
Oh.
So you're talking about not cutting the flesh too early. Do you still
Yep.
bleed them through the bloodline? You do
Yep, yeah, so when bleeding them, obviously in this photo here, they've shown it doing it with a very small knife, so they're only making a very small incision. Like your incision only needs to be, I don't know, like an inch deep. The vein runs directly beneath the skin, so you're not actually, like a lot of people you'll see try and do it with like a filleting knife, and they're cutting quite a big, long, deep hole. Basically, it's just exposing more flesh to bacteria, so when they do it, they do make special small knives for doing that so that the incision you're making is small. Yeah. Yes.
When you're jigging at night, could be dumb question. Lights on the boat, lights off the boat.
We have all the lights on just so we can see what we're up to as well. Yeah.
What about the underwater lights? Do you think that's part of it or not at all?
I don't think it affects the fishing at all. No, my underwater lights didn't work at all last year, and it didn't affect me. So it was all good. Yes, sir.
On the drop a lot jigging, have you tried any of the bigger, more slow pitch style fluttering jigs?
Yep. Yeah. Well, I've got a whole bag of heaps of different jigs, man. They it's like there is a balance on trying to get down to the depth where they are, and then having the action on the jig as well. But we used a heap of short. We got bit on a lot of jigs. Pretty much anything that had a lot of action on the fall, we got bit on. Yeah.
Luke, are these fish, how far north do they come?
Uh,
And are they
it
travelling
varies
from
every
south
year.
to north?
So they're coming from the south to north. They've come from the Indonesian waters over in WA, like Western Australia, northwestern Australia. They've swum along the bottom all the way around the bottom of New Zealand and up to our East Cape here. Depending on how far they go, varies every year. So some years they'll get to like the Poor Knights Rise, some years they'll only get to like the Barrier Bank and then turn, and they generally go back down. Yeah.
Did you get any at the Alderman's last?
I did not try, no.
Did you hear of it?
Yep. Scott from Daiwa, who's here tonight, he caught one at the Alderman's. Yep. Yeah, they get them there. They get them like anywhere where they're going to be through the season. Every year is a little bit different, but Waihao Bay is the largest concentration of them. Yeah. All right.
Okay.
All good.
Can I just thank Luke terribly
Hey, no worries,
very
mate.
much for
Oh,
your thing.
yeah.
And Simon gets the consolation prize of some chocolates. Just two things that I'll say. To weigh at the Waihao Boat Club, you have to be a member
Of a club.
of a New Zealand Sport Fishing Council affiliated club. You can't just rock up there and expect them to weigh your fish. So you need to sort out, you know, you go spend a lot of money to go down there, catch a fish, you catch a bloody 96 kilo fish, and then they won't weigh it because you're not a member of a club.
Also a note on that, they'll often have a weigh time too. So the weighmaster down there, again, all the weighmasters will be volunteers, probably the same as yours. And they'll also have weigh times down there where they'll generally only weigh fish between 3 and 5 in the afternoon. So be aware of that. Be aware that they're volunteers down there as well. So they're volunteering their time to weigh your fish. So one, make sure you're a club member, and two, make sure you're not doing it in a stupid hour of the day, you know, or wait for them to be ready. Yeah.
And respect, but because it's so popular, parking's a real issue down there. Respect what they ask you to do in terms of parking.
Yeah.
You know, you've just got to respect the locals. They've had.
Which one?
Sorry?
Which one?
No. You just got to be courteous to them. You know,
Yeah.
they've been invaded by tons of these tinnies coming from all over the North Island.
Yeah.
And you know, we've had bluefin tuna weighed here, which have been caught off the barrier, which have been caught out of Wakatani. So they're around. You've just got to put in the miles.
Yeah, on that, like with the parking and everything like that, a lot of people, like in the early days, like 2017, 18, 19, it was very busy and there were massive queues. Waihao Bay got a real bad name for hundreds of us turning up down there and just trashing the place. Things have settled down a little bit since then, but I highly recommend if you're going to go down there, like have time so that you can, like if you're going to go first thing in the morning when there is a rush, either go earlier and go sleep out in the haven, or like launch your boat earlier then, so that you're not in this big queue, to give yourself time so that you're not parking over somebody's driveway, or go down there the day before. Most people I recommend to get down there in the daylight and actually just drive down, check the haven out in daylight, and then check out the parking so you know 4 o'clock the next morning you're not driving around trying to find a car park, you know, like it's just having the time, and having time on your side's a good thing to have.
It's a fantastic fishery, and you know, good luck to everyone going down and trying to take advantage of it. And Luke he's got all the magic, he's done it, and it's fantastic. And if you need a club, we're open for membership here, so help yourself. Thank you everyone for coming, and Luke's got some...
Oh, yeah, basically I'll just stay, I'll be here for the next little bit having some beers, so feel free to come ask some questions and have a look at the stuff and everything like that. Sweet. Thank you guys.